sequel number 140 of the Church of Uganda at 150 years a celebration. In this particular sequel, Christmas special part B, and in this sequel, the annual Pagan Winter Solstice celebrations around the world. Yesterday, or the other day in sequel 139, we saw that this had nothing to do with Julius Africanas' discovery of the 25th of December as the birth of Jesus Christ Day in his book CHRONOGRAPHIA. I'm not going to go to that again today. Let's discover what is this, the annual Pagan Winter Solstice that is celebrated across many societies across the world. I want to begin by defining the word solstice. Solstice means the sun standing still. Oh yes, it has ever happened in the Bible, in the book of Joshua. However, the solstice means that the sun stands still. And this happens only once in midwinter for those who live in the temperate zones. In the middle of winter, the sun stands still. And on that day, it is the very last day, the gate between the seasons in winter. One season, darkness is longer than light. And the other season, light is longer than darkness. So if we know that, then let us address the midpoint of that season, and it is called a solstice. Now, it was visible in many countries that have temperate weathers or snow. It was the same. That's why this pagan festival cuts across societies. Now, for the Romans, they gave it a name. They called it, there was a god to worship. And it was time to worship their god of agriculture. Their god of agriculture was called Saturn. S-A-T-U-R-N. Saturn, from which we get the word Saturday. So our name Saturday is after the Roman god of agriculture, Saturnalia. Now, the festival of Saturnalia was always on this particular midpoint in winter, the solstice. That's why it is called the winter solstice. The winter season is continuing, but it is the light and the darkness which is changing from many hours of darkness, which are more than light, to many hours of light, more than the darkness hours. And that season was celebrated from December the 24th all the way to December the 25th. And it was observed across many societies across the world. Now, that was as far as the Romans were concerned. Now, later on, it even became a week. You know, our people are very funny. One day became too small. So they started recognizing the festivities and taking a whole week of celebrations. Now, what were they doing in that particular festival? They were gambling. They were socializing, which means eating and drinking. They were exchanging gifts. And then because the darkness was ending, or the total darkness was ending, they lit candles. They lit candles, and then they began to prepare for that gate of the new month, which they called Janus, or for us we call it January. Some 200 years before Christmas, before the Christmas day, what we call Christmas Day, some 200 years before we also made our Christmas Day in the same gate because of Africanas, there had been an earlier festival again in Europe. That one was called the Nose Yule. The Nose Yule, or just simply the Yule. And this Nose Yule was also to celebrate the same solstice festival. But only that one was for the Scandinavian people. The Scandinavian people are a little bit in the north of Europe. Now, the Scandinavian people, this was witchcraft. This was worshipping other gods other than the God we know. And it was even longer before Christ. So they would light a wood, and it's the wood, a log, which was called Yule. So they would cut the Yule, dry it, and then they will use they would make fire out of that wood. And then they believe that the light from the Yule tree would invite sunlight back the following day, because this was the midpoint of winter, from darkness to light. So that lighting of the wood, the Yule wood, will invite light the following day. And indeed, the following day, light would begin, and it will be longer than darkness. Now, the Yule log was burned on a daily basis throughout the time of the darkness. So from the season we call autumn, all the way to winter and into middle point of the winter, the Yule log was always burnt, and they would worship the god of Yule, asking him to have mercy on them until light returns. And now on this solstice day, light indeed returned. And therefore, that is the solstice festival of other gods, simply worshipping the sun. That's why you hear it is the sun day. Now, this festival, which is celebrated by many others, is called the Yalda in Iran. Now, Iran used to be Persia. Iran never used to belong to Arabs or Muslims, for that matter. So I'm talking of the Persian people of those so many years ago. And they used to have the festival at this particular solstice season, midpoint, and they used to call it Yalda. And they sometimes called it the Shabe Yalda, which meant victory of light over darkness. So you see, same story. Light has returned. So they are all worshipping the god of light, the sun. And then in Sweden, as much as it's also a Scandinavian country, later on they began to recognize what they used to call the midsummer festival. But it was all satanic and worshipping other gods. Then later on, even the Scandinavian countries started worshipping what they called Lucia. Again, Lucia was a festival of the sun. Then in Pakistan, again, don't look at Arabs. This time there were no Arabs at that time. There was no Islamic faith at that time. Just look at a Persian empire. And therefore, we had people there in Pakistan at that time who had a festival called the CHRONOGRAPHIA. The CHRONOGRAPHIA festival. Again, a festival of worshipping the sun, because darkness is now ceasing and they are going into light, although winter it was still on. Winter would go on almost all the way to March. And then in China, and I want to stop with the Chinese. The Chinese will call this particular midpoint, or the solstice, they would call it the Dongzi. The Dongzi, as far as the Chinese were concerned, used to start around the 21st to the 23rd of December. So as you see, none of them actually ever reached the 25th. And then they would celebrate this solstice when they believed that the sun would stand still. I want to conclude this particular sequel by looking at these days of the Romans, because one would wonder, why are we so much taken by this Roman culture, words, and festivals and traditions. But you would be very wrong, because even the calendar we use, whether the Julian calendar, whether the Roman calendar, whether the Gregorian calendar, they all have their origin from the Romans. The only difference there is by the monk from Asia, Dionysius Exiguus, who devised the Anno Domini calendar, which we are using. Actually, we are in the year 2024 of Anno Domini, year of our Lord. But I told you there is a problem in the margin of error, and that margin of error has now been recognized by the United Nations. They no longer call it Anno Domini. They instead call it the years of common era. And they no longer say before Christ. Instead, they say before the common era. So the United Nations has changed that particular terminology. But that is all because in the 9th century, the Arab numbers were introduced. And when you are counting in the Arab numbers, you begin with 0. So the BC should have actually begun with 0 BC, then 1, sorry, AD, and then 1 AD, 0 AD, and then 1 AD. So there is an error there of 1 year. And then for us in Christology, we have an error between the death of Herod and what we call the Anno Domini. It should not have been there. So we have problems all over there. But then I want to conclude by these other names. The Roman god named after the day following the sun day was called the moon's day. So the other one was the sun, this one was the moon. Then the following day, which is the 3rd day of the week for the Romans, was after the Roman god of law, and he was called Tiw, T-I-W. The god of gods for the Romans was called a Wooden, and therefore that day was called a Wooden's Day, and it was the 4th day in the Roman calendar. And then the following day, the god of war, Thar. So he was named, the day was named after Thar, and it became Thar's Day. The god of love was called Frida, and so the day was named after him, Friday. And we have just realized that the god of agriculture was Saturn, and that his day was named after him, and it became Saturday. So all the names of the days of our week are Roman, and they belong to gods. Therefore, if you are already saying that, how come the Romans, if I now went to the months, you'll even be surprised more. May the good Lord bless us all.